This is the Senior Life Academy located on the campus of University Park United Methodist Church here in Dallas, Texas. I'm Dee Dee Cassad, and today we're going to talk about grace with our panel. Our panel members are Diana Wilson, Stephen Fleming, Miriam Mathis, and Bob Monroe. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I know you are all familiar with grace, but we need to tell our audience how we really feel about it, what it is, and is it only God-given. So tell me, what is the meaning of grace? Let's start with the beginning. What do you consider grace to mean? Bob?
Well, the first thing I thought of when you brought up the subject was again, going back being Methodist, was Wesley's three terms. Prevenient grace, which is there in the beginning for all. Mm-hmm. The justifying grace, where we have to, as free will, we have to accept, and sanctifying grace, where once we accept and become a follower of Jesus, then I don't know if you use the term obligation, but it's certainly that is how I look at it.
It's a responsibility.
That you go ahead and show your neighbors love by doing for others.
Is grace taught? Can we teach it in a classroom? What do you think, Diana?
Oh, yeah, I think, well, certainly, when we do Bible studies and the ministers preach from the pulpit, they talk about grace. I remember on the walk to Emmaus that there's a whole grace talk. Clergy talk to you about all the different kinds of grace.
But give me a meaning, Diana, of what grace is.
Well, I've got some notes here. If grace is found, let's see, this is from Richard Rohr.
Okay.
Grace is key, he says. The goodness of God fills all the gaps of the universe without discrimination or preference. God is the gratuity of absolutely everything. And so that's part of his definition.
Gratuity.
Of grace. Gratuity.
Do you agree, Stephen?
Oh, absolutely. And, but I want to go back to just a fundamental meaning of grace. I think it helps me sometimes to hear things contrasted against each other, just to get some clarity. I know one wise person once said that when you get what you deserve, that's judgment. When you get what you don't deserve, when you don't get what you deserve, that's mercy. And when you get what you don't deserve, that's grace. It's a gift.
It is.
We have so much trouble with that, I think, in our culture, that we even have to sometimes say free gift because we really don't know about accepting something as generous and giving as grace is.
Well, to me, grace is unearned, unmerited favor of God, in other words, and unexpected. Mm-hmm. The grace that I've received many times is totally unexpected. It happens and there it is. Mm-hmm. And you think, oh, I didn't expect that. And it's the most beautiful thing when you realize that's what it is. You agree, Miriam?
I think so, and I think sometimes I think of it as like a big interruption in your life that, and all of a sudden you think, oh, I have to pay attention to this because it may be an interruption, but it's a good one, and it's a surprise, and it's out of nowhere. Sometimes I also like to think about grace as solar energy, like sunshine.
Uh-huh.
Like, not to sound Pollyanna about it, but the sun is what powers all of life on Earth, and God's constant profligate giving to us, his unearned gifts of his presence and his energy and love make it possible for us to live. So I think of that as grace, and I think of our response to it as soaking it up and being actively grateful for it.
Absolutely. So if grace is given to us, can we then pass it on? How do we pass on grace? Is that our responsibility? Is that our duty to do as a Christian, to pass on grace if we understand? How can we give other people grace?
I think it's one of the earmarks of actually having received grace and knowing it, that it's not, it transforms your response from being duty to being, initiating grace to others. If it really makes you become a more gracious person when you know that you're receiving it. And I say you know you're receiving it, because many times we're the recipients of grace without knowing it.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
the prevenient grace that Bob
Exactly.
was talking about.
Explain the prevenient grace.
Well, it's, by definition, it's the grace that goes before us.
Uh-huh.
It's the grace that comes to us because of the circumstances in which we're born, the environment that nurtures us,
That's right.
It's grace that comes before we're even aware of.
I have a
Yeah.
personal
Okay.
experience of prevenient
good.
grace. It's really powerful. It's part of my faith story. And because for a long time I did not go to church, I had some issues with the church, and so I just left. And when I was in my 30s, I started having these longings. It's just it's hard to describe it. I just had this longing to go to church. And it was like, what is this? And then I had a car accident. I was taking my oldest son home from a dental appointment, and somebody ran a red light and just T-boned us. You know, it was not a good thing. I mean, we all survived fine, but I remember sitting on the couch at home and saying to myself, there's got to be more to life than this. And I have this image, I told you about it the other day, I have this image of life, I had this image of life as a stage, and just walking around on the stage, and there were trap doors there, and you didn't know where they were. And, you know, if you weren't careful, if one was going to open, you were just going to fall through. And so, and that's where I was without the church. And for me, that's prevenient grace. That's God working in my life to pull me closer, because I knew, I don't know that the church is the answer, but the church is where you, in our culture, where we have the opportunity to find God, where we have the opportunity to talk to people about God, where we have the opportunity to get some of our questions answered.
Absolutely.
As we talk about grace, I was thinking of some people might be put off by, unless they have been deep in their faith in church. Well, this grace thing, you know, we're talking about a lot of maybe technical terms or God terms. And I might suggest try substituting the word love for grace.
Interesting.
Prevenient love. God loved the world before we existed. God loves us, and as we accept God, we need to pass that love on to others.
So
The greatest commandment was love thy, after loving God, was love thy neighbor.
Good
And that
sub-
may help
good
people
yeah,
explain it.
good substitute. That does make sense, because God loved us even before we were.
And Stephen said, and I agree, it's not because it's our duty. It's not
No.
because we can check it off the checklist and that's one more gets our ticket closer to heaven. But it's from gratitude.
Okay.
Because when you know that it's grace, you are grateful.
Well, and to substitute love for it. How do you explain justifiable grace, Bob?
I hadn't thought of, again, justifying, but I think if you accept that love from God and the love of Christ, then, as James said, you know, faith without works is dead. And so you go to action, as we've heard someone before talk about it when we discussed grace previously. But that action means you go out and you help others, others less fortunate, and no obligation. As Stephen said, it's a gift. You give your love to people unconditionally. And by our actions, they will know our love.
And grace is unconditional too.
yes.
You can't qualify it or quantify it. How do you see that, Mary?
Well, I was just reading. The Luke, the beginning of Luke, and where the angel appears to Mary and says, "Do not be afraid. You
Are in favor.
you have found favor with God," and she's totally blown away by that, and she doesn't have any idea even kind of what that means. But I think because he goes on and he says it again. You found favor with the Most High. And when I looked at grace in the Bible dictionary, which I like to do, is it talks about favor being a synonym of in the Greek word charis, I think you call it,
Mm-hmm.
you say it.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means that the person who is giving the grace finds delight in the object of the grace.
Interesting.
So, it's almost like the angel is saying, God thinks you're so delightful and you're so wonderful and has found you to be a precious receptacle here.
Very good. I think that's a real description to me of grace, because I think it pleases God to favor us.
It pleases him to just abundantly give the universe all the beautiful things we have around us, and he's profligate with it.
And if we just stop and think, like Stephen said about the basics, we were born in America. We're born in a family. We have plenty of food. The grace is abundantly provided for us. And so it appears to me that if that's the case and we realize it, we can do no other but pass it along the best way we can. So how do we do that? How do we, in any event, how are we gracious to other people? If we're, for instance, driving to work here this morning, I let somebody go ahead of me. I had the right, but I go right on. I've got time. And it's little things like that I think that
Absolutely.
I don't mean to get credit for it. I'm just saying that there are ways that we can demonstrate it. You agree with that, Stephen?
I do. I'm so glad you said, not that I deserve credit for it, or I'm getting
Right.
credit for it. We're asking about justifying grace. We moved from prevenient to justifying. And that's such a tricky one for us, because we think that we're justifying the grace that we receive. But justifying grace means that God has already done the justifying for us.
But we're justified also by faith.
He's telling us that we're loved before we even say, "Okay, God,
Uh-huh.
I love you."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the old simple way of breaking down that word is just as if, justifying just as if I had never sinned.
Right.
That's justifying grace. He has removed that stigma from us and that impediment to feeling the connection with God.
Very good.
Don't you think that parable about the sowers in the field, where the people who go to the field first thing in the morning, and then the people who come midday, and then the people who come at the end of the day, they all get paid the same at the end. And for me, that's grace,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
because it's got nothing to do with production.
Well, and our human tendency is to say, well, that they didn't deserve it.
Yeah, it's not fair.
And then
That's not fair.
And then the master says, "Are you going to begrudge me for being generous?" And we're left with that question inside ourselves.
It does.
Are we going to allow God to be gracious with whom God wants to be gracious to?
So does generosity equate with grace? Do you see it?
It can.
It can.
I think we need to start with gratitude. I think if we are aware of all the blessings we have in our life and we are grateful to God for all we have, I think it's the same concept as loving ourselves. It's hard to love other people if you don't love yourself. And I think it's hard to be gracious to other people if you don't have a sense of gratitude for all that you have.
Absolutely. Well, let's for a minute. Let's talk about the sanctifying grace. Bob, you want to start us off with that one?
Again, I may have had it wrong, but I think of the sanctifying grace as once you have, of your free will, accepted the love of Christ and the duty that comes with it once you accept that Christ in your life. Again, I look at it as I said earlier, action, that you love thy neighbor by doing acts. That can be little ones. Sometimes we might think it's a lot of money, or sometimes it's just being polite to someone who's down on their luck, recognizing that we have been so fortunate, most of us, in our lives. And Diane was talking about the vineyard workers, the people who came in at the last minute, got paid the same as the people who worked all day. Made me think of if you were fortunate enough to be born to a good family or have good fortune in business or work and have a lot of property or assets, are you worth any more than the day laborer who is trying to struggle, who didn't have that kind of good fortune? And both of us are equal to God.
Absolutely.
And so that day laborer really deserves as much love and gratitude for what they do as the rich person who may give a lot.
Well, do you consider when you are gracious, is that a spiritual thing for you? Is that a spiritual thing for you, Stevie?
It's a spiritual experience to me. It's not so much a spiritual discipline. Sometimes
contrast.
maybe it can be, but having a gracious response to a situation produces a sense of community with God's people.
And it changes the dynamics of what's happening. It adds a feature to it that if you did not participate with the graciousness, it would not be there.
To me, there's some kind of also alchemy involved in being gracious to our fellow people and also to the earth, really. When we talk about sanctifying grace, that comes to me from my background as being to be made holy. Well, if you're gracious as God is gracious to us, then you're really imitating him and making your likeness more like him. Therefore, your whatever holiness means, sacred, I think it's communion with God, then you are, your graciousness practiced makes you more like God, and it also spills over and makes other people aware of God's love. So there's this kind of neat chemistry going on there.
Well, thank you. Our time is about up. I appreciate all of you participating. We would like for you to respond to us in any way you would like. We'd like to hear from you and hope that you appreciate and enjoy what we are doing to provide grace to you in the way that we can through our faith and our participation in church work. So bless you now for all you are, and may God surround you with his grace.